Molweni, my name is Luvuyo Matasa, and I'm the Executive Director of Reimagine SA. Today's conversation is with Mr. Shombe Makwata, who is part of an exciting organization, the CEO, in fact, of Mandlonke Property Group. And today is a continuation of a discussion had last week. It was a webinar on accelerating inclusive social housing, and this was hosted with various different stakeholders and discussing the importance of coming together to deliver progressive solutions that are inclusive and help with the shelter needs and the development needs of South Africa. Mr. Shombe Makwata had joined us last week, and in part today's conversation is going to get his impressions on the discussion, and then we're going to drill in a bit more direct into his organization and the work that he's doing. So with that, I'd like to invite Shombe just to give a quick introduction of who he is and what he's about and his impression of last week's discussion. Shombe.
Thanks, Luvuyo. I appreciate the invitation. As you mentioned, we are the Mandlonke group of companies. We focus on property development, in particular social housing. Our background spans a good 15 years. We started in industrial, then moved over to commercial property. And then we did retail property from roughly 2010 to about 2014 under Billion Group. And in 2005 to 2010, we were under the company called Baker Street Properties, who focus on broking, and Billion Group focus on retail development. And then we've basically been on our own since 2014 to date. We've had a stab at, what do you call it, student accommodation, which we didn't fare too well due to reasons we can discuss later. And so in the last 2.5 to 3 years, we've been focusing on social housing, which is where we see ourselves making a huge difference with regards to our social economic impact at this point in time. And yeah, so basically the takeout from the webinar that we had last week is that the impressive part is that everyone is actually aware of the depth of the problem that we have with regards to social housing. I mean, the explanation in the video that the Reimagine guys gave us there was actually a good eye-opener. I mean, there were people who have sewage running right across from the front of their front door throughout the whole street. And you have people whose houses damp up when you have rains and the likes. So we got a very visual picture of the depth of the problem. And that was just in the Eastern Cape. This also goes all the way around throughout the national footprint. What I liked is also the touch from Professor Mbanga, Sichekula Mbanga. He understood the problem in its depth. I like that he even used his own personal touch, where he touched on the fact that for his daughter to understand value chain in order to be able to give back, that he used the example of he wouldn't let her go start at a government municipal institution where she hands out tenders because she doesn't know the depth of the problem. So she wouldn't know what the work those guys do. She would only be giving jobs at the back of the lowest tender to win the problem. So I got the understanding that he understood in depth what the problem is, and our people, even the service providers, need to know what problems to solve in order to reach our goal with regards to the social impact. And then I also got a very nice understanding from the likes of Shra, and their plans going forward. What I really liked about what Rory mentioned, who is the CEO of Shra, was that, you know, for his mandate and his aspect of business, which is to deliver social housing in South Africa, is that he doesn't need the economy to be moving where in order for the housing to come through. His idea is that it's actually quite the other way around, where now his delivery of social housing, he considers it infrastructure in order to feed into an economy for the economy to grow. And I thought that was a very insightful thinking coming from the CEO of Shra. And he's very adamant on wanting and keen to spend every single cent that they get from government because that's their mandate. And he's very, very aware that, you know, this is an infrastructure issue in his mind, and the spend is something very, very important. And then also touching on what the DDG mentioned and some of actually the questions he was answering, they are aware of the issues. You know, they are very much aware of the issues, particularly with regards to the delivery of these housing. The quality tends to be a serious issue where people give housing, you know, charge a lot, but give very substandard housing, which they are very much aware of. There are a couple of cases that are going on now that have been publicized on TV, as well as the money wastage. You know, he's quite aware that there are certain departments where money gets wasted. People overprice, officials give tenders to guys who can't deliver. And then obviously the likes of corruption, you know, and what I like about it is that they are much aware of it and they are trying to improve. They are working hard on improving this, and it's a good start. You know, as long as they know where they're going wrong and they know where to plug these problems, it's a good start. And then, then South African Cities Network, I rather understood that they do more of the research aspect, of which we also have in-house. We use the GIS program to do that, but it will cut problems short or time short in future. We could just approach them for the specific needs that we have. And then, that's how I think they, you know, helped us understand their role in the whole social housing aspect.
Thank you very much for that summary. And I think it gives us a good sense of the very many moving parts and what an organization and a leader of an organization like yourself has to be mindful of when you're looking to not only solve a problem for people on the ground, but deliver a quality product in doing so. So I'd like you to share a bit more about your transition from student housing and the opportunity that you identified specifically now in the delivery of social housing and how that experience has differed from one particular product and another. For someone like myself who's not specifically in the industry, it seems like erecting housing and a structure to put a roof over someone's head is by and large the same thing. What has been your experience between the delivery, at least within the sector, but the different modalities of the housing as you touched on?
Yeah, so to start with the, no, obviously this is strictly from our perspective. So to start with the student accommodation situation, so where it discouraged us, now I'm speaking strictly from our point of view, where it discouraged us was that the likes of NSFAS shift goalposts when it comes to, one, the student criteria, basically what the landlords must have in place for the students, which is the likes of a stove, a bed, certain amount of space with regards to GLA, the size of the room, refrigeration and toilets per certain amount of students and the likes. So they shift these goalposts on an annual basis, including rent as well. You know, they shifted rent. The main reason why we actually went backwards and actually pulled out, we lost a lot of money on that. We pulled out, but we thought pulling out earlier rather than going into it would be far less detrimental to us. So what would happen more specifically in my case is they added, for instance, they would say 2 plates per 4 students. They shifted goalposts in the last minute and they basically said, look, we want you to increase the plates of stoves per student, but decrease the rent. And now when you're doing 400, 600 odd beds, that messes up your financial planning, and you actually can't have a financial model that can sustain that if the guys are gonna keep shifting goalposts like that. So that was the discouraging part from a developer, is that I couldn't do a financial model that fits the delivery and actually sorting out what the students need going forward. And it was always gonna be a problem for us to balance that out. So with regards then to the product and what I think is needed with regards to social housing. So how we look at it as a company and part of our mission statement is that, you know, firstly, would you want to stay there? That is normally the bottom line and the first and only question that I ask. Would I be comfortable staying there? So is the toilet working? Is the roof not leaking? Is the size decent? You know, is the next door neighbor, you know, right next to us? And, you know, is the quality of the structure, is it not cracking? With regards to, you know, it normally starts at the foundation, the whole cracking aspect of a building. So, I mean, are those boxes ticked? So that is where, to me, the change will always be made. So if you build a structure, there shouldn't be a reason or in any way that structure should give in, especially in the first 5 years. Look, there will be snags every now and then. I mean, you're not going to be always perfect, but the snags should be something so minor that it's sorted out within the first week of someone moving in. And I mean, what the guys have also realized is that, look, the problem is not necessarily not going away. So the change starts with us, particularly the platform that you guys created. You know, I like that the guys, they are all aware of the problem, and it starts with the chat. It starts with us talking about what this problem is, so that we can come to solutions. And you guys did bring the correct people around the table, which is actually what attracted me personally to it. You know, I was very keen on hearing Professor Mbanga, as well as Rory in particular, about what their thinking is. We've been trying to get with them, but we've done a few deals with Turf, but we've been trying to work with Shra, because they specifically focus on social housing, and their terms are quite decent for a developer. So we are very much aware of that. And I think it's starting from chats at that level. What you guys have done is absolutely perfect. And that's what I see will help in triggering us making the difference as developers to the social problem that we have.
So before we get into the actual execution side of things and the promising change that you want to make as the developers, you mentioned a very interesting point, both in the example shared about Professor Mbanga's daughter, in terms of an understanding of the theoretical aspects of what it takes to deliver property assets on the ground versus the practical implementation thereof. And you also spoke to institutional bodies whose response to a moving reality of affordability. So you spoke to the student housing and NFSS essentially coming in and chopping and changing what your spec is. What would you say is the impact? Yes, you've given an example of pulling out of one particular, book of delivering houses in the student accommodation and now into the social space. My question would be, what would be the impact experienced by yourselves as entrepreneurs in this environment, where the legislation or the institution responsible for you delivering those assets in a timely manner, affordable manner, and within budget, what is the impact of things like moving goalposts from 2 to 4 plates and reducing rent to you running a sustainable business?
So in a nutshell, the main issue there is that we go into business to also make a living. So the problem is when they start shifting goalposts, you can't have a sustainable financial model, which effectively, we take on huge loans to service. But now if the institutional body does not stick to a fair and consistent way of working with you, basically the rent, and not shift the goalposts to the like, we can't make money, and therefore we can't service the loan, and therefore our businesses die. I mean, I don't want to mention figures, but we were a fairly small company. So that put me off. It took me a good 2 odd years to come back and be able to do another development with Turf, because the monies that I had saved up to put down as a deposit for that is partly the money that went. So it's very detrimental at the back of the financial aspect. And remember, property is very capital heavy. So you even banks, they don't service guys, or they don't fund guys who don't have capital. So you can imagine, I've been working for many a year to save that kind of capital to go put into this deal. It was, 600 odd bids, so it was a very sizable deal. So I put this capital in, and I had the funding from NEF. Everything was lined up, but I couldn't bring myself to push through, simply because I realized then, like, what's going to happen next year? I'm not going to be able to sell. I'm not going to be able to do that. My product then is going to start to suffer, because I won't even have money to fix certain things. I won't have money to deliver, because we're all about quality in our company. Would I send my kids to my student accommodation? And if I start to doubt that, that's where the thought of considering other alternatives starts to kick in. But the biggest part is that, we are in business to be sustainable, not even necessarily to make money. We know that it takes a while for it to turn a profit. So we can't, and actually I don't think any businessman can, take that risk, because it's very risky for your financial well-being as well as your company. I mean, we've got people we employ, so those people are going to be out of business. So the thought process of pulling out had all of that was taken into account. You know, there are jobs, there are the likes of us even going under. So we had to cut our losses and actually move ahead. So to me, what I would like to possibly see the institutions do is, you know, give us, because what they do in student accommodation, they give you, firstly, when you're starting a 1-year lease with NSFAS, and then after 3 years, they give you a 2-year lease. And then once you've been there with them on the 5 years, then they consider, and they reserve the right to not give you a long-term lease each and every single time. So it becomes very risky taking that risk as a developer. So what I would even suggest in a case like this is that they could do a typical lease like a government office lease. You know, they give you a long-term lease. All the terms of what you need to deliver should and must be put up front, so that, you know, as a developer, you can actually even have a fixed and solid financial model taking into account all the possible changes that they might want up front. So if you don't know year on year what these guys are going to do, you can't build a sustainable business around that. So what I would strongly suggest is that they could use the model of a commercial government building where it's a 10-year lease or 8-year lease, whatever. And obviously they force you to tick the criteria up front. So you would have all that criteria ticked. And then we stick to that for the 5 to 10 years, whatever the lease length would be. And we stick to that throughout the length of the lease. That way we both benefit in that we deliver for the students and we are able to sustain the business and have it grow as the time goes.
Now back to the social housing aspect, and now your new thrust as the property developers that you're now positioned as in the social housing side of things. You spoke about the availability, one, of the institutions who are aligned with what you're looking to deliver, and the magnitude of the opportunity. What then does the availability of funding and the terms that enable you as an organization to deliver on that? What can you say about your experience in raising capital to essentially deliver on the mandates that you receive?
Sure. So I'll refer to two that are fairly prominent in that space, which is effectively TURF as well as SHRA. So I've got experience with TURF. So now this is strictly speaking from an institution, yes, government funded, but an institution that's trying to help Black developers. Obviously, you can go to banks if you've got the big money, the big capital. You can approach your big four, etc. Now I'm focusing on how us as Black developers are helped and what that funding structure looks like. So I'll talk to TURF because I've done a couple of deals with TURF. So TURF basically obviously looks at whether you have the experience, you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about. They've got a very nice criteria on how they choose guys. And they like the entrepreneurial approach to things. You're solving a problem, you have an idea of what you can do with the property. And then what normally ticks the final box is if your deal, basically the property and your deal that you're putting up front is feasible. You know, and they expect you to obviously bring this first and then they go poke holes in it to see if you understand what you talk about. So TURF basically gives you funding. They give you roughly 80%. And then if you now have a deal that is extremely profitable, whereas even if they give you 100% funding, you still make a bit of money on the back end. So what they do in cases like that, they've got a funding structure. So there's two of them. One of them is Mastandi, which is more focused on locations, which is the townships and the likes. And then they've also got Intutuko, which would be now more on your urban side of areas just around your CBDs and the likes, which is where we focused. So Intutuko is now the one that we went with. So they gave us a further 15 to 18% funding on that. And they expected us to put down just a little money for commitment, because the deal overall was so feasible and was so positive that from day one, if you have a fully let space, you start making your money. So they work with you on that basis, whereas now the main thing that normally stops us as Black developers is that we don't have capital. We come with experience, we come with all that we know, but We don't have skin in the game in the sense of the capital. And now this is where the likes of Turf helps tremendously with guys who are in the space, who are keen on doing it and who know what they're doing. So that is Turf, and Turf is fantastic in that sense. So Shra, I've been trying to get in with Shra for some years now, but I haven't had much luck. But I understand their funding terms are even better. So Shra will fund, for instance, now this is strictly just reading from their websites and the likes and their seminars and that sort of thing. So Shra will, okay, you bring a deal, but they like sizable deals. So you bring a deal. Shra now has systems where they give grants, right? So now from a businessman where you get a grant, you already take out a large aspect of your expenses, which would be to service this loan. So a grant basically means they're giving you this money, you don't need to pay it back, but you must deliver on what they expect you to deliver on. So the upside with Shra is that now you get this grant, right? And then you only effectively service, say, 30 to 40% of the loan. I imagine they consider the returns on your deal before you get more or less of a grant. But from what I understand, it's always over 50%, which is a complete game changer for people in my position, should we have opportunities like that, because we can then deliver a much better quality product and more of them. You know, if you consider what we can do with money, like it's effectively free money, but obviously to deliver a product. So to me, they have always been the goal to get to, particularly for social housing, and their criteria from a point of view of delivery is somewhat similar, of what the developer must deliver is somewhat similar to what Turf does, where it must have a social impact. It must be in the areas that need this densifying, and the quality must be decent, and it must focus on the social aspect. So people must, stay close to work, which is where we invest around CBDs, in the locations, the standards there, and the likes. So that is what excites me about Shra, and I'm still gunning hard to get in with them in order to do some deals with them. So those are the two I can personally, the two funding houses and financial structures I can talk to, if you exclude the big four, who normally, in fact, not normally, who always require you to have large capital.
So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask about the big four. As you're aware, one of them has essentially sponsored the conversation that was had both in the Tshwane workshop and most recently the webinar itself. And what would be your challenge to the big four banks in terms of having favorable funding terms for the opportunity set that you've explained is quite large?
Yeah, so what I would suggest, so the person's experience that they're investing into matters, right? And I mean, those banks, to be honest with you, they look at nothing else. If you don't have capital, if you don't have a balance sheet, you're already out the door. So you're wasting your time. So what I would suggest to them is that this model that is taken by Turf, look, I haven't quite worked with Shra, so I'll speak to the style of what Turf does. So if they're keen on helping this guy, a proper black property developer, they need to have a look at, for starters, the experience. Has he done this? Does he know what he's doing? Let's look at his financial models. Has he done a financial statement? Is he our guy? Who has he worked with? What has he overseen? Starting point. And second point, which talks to now the capital aspect of it. Does this guy have a good product? So is his product making money? I'll go as far as saying from day one if it's fully let, right? Obviously, they must weigh this with the price of the property. Let's say they give you 100% on a 10 million rand property. If this guy fails for whatever reason, COVID, you name it, are we going to be able to make our money back when we sell that property? So that's what they must look at the back of, hand in hand, the deal, right? So normally you don't make money from day one in property unless you really bought a very nice low priced property, whereas you add very little value to increase its value and you still make money on it. So that talks to the fact that, look, they are de-risked in approaching it this way if they are now to consider the property feasibility, and if they are now forced to exit within the first 3 years, are they going to make or lose money? So I would strongly advise that that is the criteria they must look at and in order to give people like us a chance. Yes, I don't say no to the fact that we must also commit something, but they must work with the idea that we don't have capital. You know, so the idea that Turf uses is that, look, based on the deal, we will want you to put something down and it can go as low as 2%. So Big Four can even go as high as saying 5 to 10% is the minimum we would expect from you. That would also now talk to the risk appetite of the guy, which, you look, to some extent, I do understand where banks come from, but we need the help. And in order for us to move forward and have the transformation movement move in a positive direction, these are the kind of things they need to weigh. So one would be experience. Two would be the deal itself. When they exit, will they be making their money? And then, yeah, three, you know, you must back the horse, and the guy must have something to put down that is workable within the bank's numbers. So my advice or my thought process for a Big Four would be 5 to 10% is what they should expect a guy to be able to put down. Because remember, if this thing doesn't work, the property developer must still be able to service this loan. So if he hasn't shown some kind of commitment, you know, it should and does worry banks, which I do understand. But in order for the transformation to happen in our country, these are the sort of dynamics I believe they need to look at.
Now, what would be an ideal scenario for us to learn around this, right? So you're talking about an institution essentially giving some allowances in their risk mitigating factors, and understandably so, a lot of those risk mitigants don't align well with the people who are well versed in delivering products that are sustainable and you know, at the right quality, delivering an impact to community and the people who need it most. Now, surely something like the broad-based Black economic empowerment codes then lends itself to saying, how does a potential enterprise development relationship or an approach be considered when looking at financing things that are in this, assets that are now in the social housing environment, whereby they could explore what it looks like for them to match a turf in their funding terms, or a SHRA, and what that would look like. Is that something that an organization or an entrepreneur like yourself would be open to?
Yes, absolutely. Because, you know, like I said in the previous points, experience, you know, they must know what you've done, who you've done it with. They must be able to refer, because look, I understand borrowing money is a risky business. So in order for them to mitigate their risk, these are things they need to look at. Your experience, can you do it? And they must sit across the table from you, have a look at your financial models. But yes, man, absolutely, the Big Four, the main thing I would really suggest to them is that they must come to the party. Yes, maybe not as relaxed as the likes of SHRA and Turf, but there's a big gap in this market. You know, there's a big gap. There are guys who can do it, who do it, and they can de-risk by, like I mentioned earlier, they can de-risk themselves by making sure that your deal is in fact feasible, and the worst case scenario, they would be covered. So I would be very excited if they would come out with products like that, or financial structuring like that for the likes of us. Because what they do is they focus on the bigger guys for social housing, your likes of Cosmopolitan, your Calbro V3s, etc. For this aspect. And I mean, obviously we'll never be able to compare with those guys, but in order for us to reach both transformation as well as the social impact issues, we would play a huge role, because those guys go for the biggest deal, the largest amount of deliveries, the big guys, and we can go plug in the likes of just around CBDs and in the locations. We could make a difference in that aspect. And in the same breath, they would be they would be fulfilling transformation targets from government. I don't know if that answers your question.
So you make a very valid point, and I'd like to just dig a bit deeper, right? So what generally happens in these scenarios is that the financial and the legal guys go away, and they, you know, in accordance to what their risk appetite is, will loosen some of the requirements and not make them as stringent. But that is creating in a vacuum. And what I'm probably pushing forward to is saying, how do the big finance institutions use what is already made available in enterprise and supply development and in the space of socioeconomic development and put together a grant of sorts where they could learn upfront. So to your point, at the very least, they would tick their boxes on their transformation mandate relative to those actual funding resources. But it becomes an R&D approach. How does a pilot with an organization like yourself in the sector, in the delivery mode that you're looking to make the social impact, essentially attract the big four to then say, how do we run a pilot, identify a community whereby the likes of yourselves become the front runners in delivering in those communities. The finance that's used is grants from their side that align to the BE codes that would then be matched with the existing grants from the likes of the SHARs and the TERFs. And in then reporting back on the work that's done, learn how to structure a financing package or a financing product for developers like yourself.
So what I would say to that, Luvuyo, is that, there's been, as part of the BE codes, there's been the enterprise development you refer to, and some of the big developers, the MDEX and the likes have been now focusing on and even Atterbury and Diversity, they've been focusing on the social housing aspect. So what I would then suggest in a situation like that, because banks are very risk averse, is that these big companies, take under their wings the small developers like us, whereas now these financial models that these guys use can help assist the small, or mentor the smaller guys in doing these kind of developments. Because look, to be honest with you, it hasn't happened in the property space at all. So they don't do EDs for smaller developers. What they would do to give back is they would say, okay, guys, here's a program. We need cleaners there. We need painters there. But they don't teach or mentor guys at a level where now your next move out of that, you could be on your own. And so my process or my answer to your statement or question would be that the big guys need to be encouraged somehow to take the likes of us and other property developers who are fairly new into the game under their wing. Give them a responsibility. Yes, it won't be the largest chunk of what they are doing, but give them a portion of that. Let them completely oversee that, even if it's a deal that they bring to the table. Let them oversee that. Look, and we know, because we are in here new, we're not going to come fighting for large shareholdings and the likes. We're after the experience, and we're also after the skin in the game. Whereas now the big four will see, oh, wow, this guy worked with Investec Property Fund. He developed that. So he's got the experience that comes with Investec. Maybe we can look at him for a deal that he's doing on his own later in his career. But I would strongly think that, and I mean, it literally hasn't happened across the board with regards to these big developers or property owners taking under their wing guys who are doing something similar, and then they act as mentor to them. It just hasn't happened. And I think that's where the big four would be most likely convinced to start working with the likes of us.
That's great. And I think it's something that came out in the webinar last week, along with something that's highlighted in your profile, is the size of the opportunity. And you speak to an understanding of the need for affordable housing to accommodate the forever increasing population. And I think for a parting note, what would be what you see as the next 15 years should a lot of these partners come to the table in a meaningful and impactful way?
Sorry, can you come again with the question?
I'd say, what would the next 15 years for yourself as Shombe and Manjonge Property Group look like if all these partners and parties come to the table in a meaningful way?
We would be players in the game, and we would become a company that employs a high number of people, because we understand the full value chain, all the way from construction, development management, property management, and the like. So this could be a very, very positive move in the transformation space for the likes of us. As you know, the property space is very, very not transformed. And it's been spoken about year in, year out at CyBIRB, at the SAPOA conventions, all the time. And obviously the things we've just mentioned, the capital and the funding opportunities, are one of the major factors that stop us from this. So in the next 15 years, how I would see it is that it would make a very positive movement, particularly for employment, which we highly need in our country at this point, and then also for skills transfer. I mean, we have literally less than a handful of Black property developers and property owners in the space. I mean, just look at the listed space. There's hardly a handful of guys, and the majority, 95, 98%, is white-owned companies. And so this would help in that movement of transforming our country, and also give the jobs, give the jobs and spread more, because the pie is big enough. I believe the pie is big enough in the property space. It's big enough. It's a matter of opportunity, and the banks coming to the party with regards to not being too stringent on their funding aspects. So yeah, I mean, I would even see us in the next 15 years. 15 years is more than long enough. We could have listed in 10 years, if we were to get a decent start now. And then go play in that space of the listed space, similar to the likes of Caldro and those guys who are social housing that is listed. So it would be a very, very, if these issues that we're talking about were to come to the fore, we would be playing right up there. We would be playing right up there, and us playing up there does not mean the guys who are there or have been doing it have got any less. Because there's major space, there's huge opportunity, there's huge demand for the social housing across the country, and it's not like one developer is going to do all of them. I mean, they can also only get so much funding at a time. So there's enough of the pie for everyone to come participate, but it can only happen with the likes of the banks coming to the party.
Well, Shombe, thank you very much for your time this afternoon and for your insights, your enthusiasm and passion. It's very evident in how you share your experience and what you want to see in the sector. I don't know if you have any other parting words before we close today's interview.
Look, thank you for the opportunity. I would strongly suggest and recommend that you carry on with the webinars like you had last week. It opened my eyes. I got to meet Rory, who's the CEO of SHRA. And, changing one person's life or situation at a time with these should be maybe even the target as a minimum, because it was very insightful. I got to understand personally the depth of the problems. I mean, the part where on your guys' videos, people have had sewer running right past their front doors for years now. And I mean, that opens your eyes that you must do this thing properly and do it to a point where if your hand touched it, people must always have something positive to say about it. So it really opened my eyes to the wider problem of this social housing aspect in our country, and the fact that there are people who are very educated in it, who know about it, that people like me can always go feed from info-wise in order to make our business plans and products better going forward.
Sabulela, thank you very much for your feedback and also for making the time not only today, but to join us during the webinar. You have a great day, and we look forward to seeing your listing in 10 years.
Thanks, Louis. Have a good day.
You have a great day too.
Cheers.
Cheers.